There's currently $10 trillion in capital in family offices. But over the next 20 years, we're about to experience the largest transfer of wealth in history.
The wealthiest families in the world are quietly failing, not from bad luck, but from bad structure.
You have to set up the governance, you have to set up a mission statement, you have to have a succession plan. Then you can start investing. But people do it backwards.
Ron Diamond is creating the blueprint for ultra-high net worth family offices to survive, scale, and stay together.
Sergey Brin has a predisposition for pancreatic cancer and has donated $1 billion. But I put my money on him over the American Cancer Society.
Because real solutions come from those who care deeply and can afford to act boldly.
The family offices are going to solve not all, but many of these real world problems we've got. And I think that to me is my North Star.
Remember for our last conversation, you love TED. And I asked you if you recommended one TED Talk to watch. You had the extremely good recommendation of watching yours.
Yeah.
But I think this would be extremely valuable to the audience. Can you please tell me the story?
I graduated from Northwestern University in 1987, and my first job was at Drexel Burnham. And Milken was the driving force behind. He was a visionary behind it, and so he was my first boss. And I got a chance to, I don't think I fully appreciated his brilliance when I was just out of college, but I knew there was something very special and unique about him. And I got to spend a lot of time with him directly. So I spent a lot of time with him. He really helped to mentor me in finance. I mean, Drexel was only around for 2.5 years before they went bankrupt. So it wasn't a long period of time. But I spent a lot of time with him, and he was able to really help me think big picture, long-term vision, rather than short-term transactional, which is how Wall Street typically worked. The other thing with Milken was which was personal. My father developed prostate cancer when he was young, at 52, and right about the same time, Michael Milken developed prostate cancer. And what my dad did is what I would have done, and what most people would do, is he went to get a second opinion, a third opinion, a fourth opinion. He went to the best doctors that he could, and he lived for 3.5 years, and then he passed. What Michael Milken did, and this is why it's become very personal for me. He did go to 3 or 4 doctors, but he built it almost like a venture capital firm, right? So he basically put $2 million here, $500,000 here, $3 million here, $700,000 here. And because of Michael Milken, you, I, and all the male listeners in your podcast will probably die with, but not of, prostate cancer. And to me, that's kind of my North Star. You could look at, so he's been very impactful. I was having lunch with Michael about 3 years ago, and I put together the Family Office Initiative at Stanford University, and basically I chaired the advisory board, and I said, let's put together a Family Office Initiative at Stanford, and they didn't do it, and they thought it was a great idea, and I said, let's also put together a conference. Now, the reason I wanted to do a conference was I keynote a lot of these conferences. But I have a syndicate of about 123 family offices. These are families between $250 million to $30 billion, and we invest together in the private markets, so private equity, venture capital, real estate, credit, sports teams, etc. And I'll keynote a conference, and a lot of the family office will say, "Hey, should I go to this conference?" And almost 100 out of 100 times, I'd say no. I'm friends with the people, and they're good people, but it's basically service providers pitching to service providers. The content isn't there. So if you're speaking, you might be smart, you might not be, but you spent $25,000, and that's the only reason I'm listening to you. So it was a sponsor-driven model, and it was backwards. So what I wanted to do at Stanford was to kind of create something that was the antithesis, where I would tell you or your listeners or the families that invest with me, yeah, this is a conference you should go to. So the first thing, I went to Kirkland & Ellis, because we do a lot of work with Kirkland & Ellis. Ryan Harris runs the family office division there. And EY, we do a lot of work with EY. Bobby Stover runs the family office division there. I said, look, here's kind of what I want to do. I don't want to do the heavy lifting, But I will do two things. I will get you world-class speakers, and I'll get you the content that family offices want to hear, and you do the rest. And they agree. So I'll give you three quick examples of this. The first person I called was Paul Carbone. Paul's a good friend of mine. Paul runs a family for Tony and JB Pritzker. Brilliant guy. Paul was talking simply about due diligence. He wasn't pitching a fund. He wasn't raising money. He didn't have any agenda. He was just saying, look, we at Pritzker, we start with 500 companies. It goes to 200. It goes to 20. When it gets to 15 or so, I come in. Then we have an investment committee meeting. Then we vote on it. And he just talked about how the process of due diligence worked at Pritzker. No agenda, just education. Second example, Tim Callahan, good friend. He was Sam Zell's partner. This was during COVID. He wasn't raising Fund 3 or Fund 4. He was simply opining on what he thought was going to happen to the office market. Because if you can remember, during COVID, people didn't know if we'd ever come back to offices. And he was just giving his thoughts. And he was, by the way, he was like spot on everything he predicted. But again, he didn't have an agenda. He was just educating people on, at a time when people really wanted to know what's going to happen to offices, you get the top guy in the world saying, here's what I think is going to happen. No agenda. And the third and last example I'll give is Denise Illich. Denise is a close friend, and they own Little Caesars and a couple sports teams in Detroit. She, along with Dan Gilbert, helped to rebuild Detroit. She wasn't asking people at the conference to donate to her charity to make Detroit a better city. She was just saying, look, you need to run it more like a business. And here's what we got wrong, but here's what we did right. And again, no agenda, just educating people on how to basically run a philanthropy more like a business to make it more successful. So we had 880 families from 6 continents on a Zoom call, tenfold what Kirkland EY expected, and it did great. What happened next was John Doerr donated $1.5 billion for the school sustainability at Stanford, and I didn't, and it got political. And so 3 years ago, I was having lunch with Michael Milken, which ties back to your question about Michael Milken, and Steve Kaplan, who runs the top professor at University of Chicago Booth. And I told Steve what I had created at Stanford and what I'm looking to do. And I said I wanted to move the program over to Booth because it was getting political. And before I finished the sentence, he said, done. So he said at the same time, Paul Carbone also wanted to put together a family office initiative. So me, Paul Carbone, and Steve Kaplan 3 years ago got together, kind of sketched out what we thought it would look like, and we put a program together. So again, there's another area where it was with Michael Milken, where he was very influential in helping me to start launching the program at University of Chicago Booth. So he's been a major influence in my life, both personally and professionally.
That's your answer just gave me 1,000,001 questions, because for myself, I have a content background, so I'm thinking through the content lens. And when you talk about the content for family offices, a lot of it they don't want to be pitched services with an agenda on the back end. A lot of the content they just want for content's sake. But we can touch on that in a minute. So I just wanted to say that that's very interesting. But when you say running philanthropy like a business, what are things that family offices allow you to do that other methods of doing philanthropic work don't allow you to do? Because usually when you think philanthropy, you think, well, I want to start a nonprofit. I want to start, I don't want to make any money doing this. I want to just help solve this problem. What advantages does that lends to solving the same problem?
It's a great question. Well, first, let's go back for a minute. There's currently $10 trillion in capital in family offices. So it's large, and there's currently $6.5 trillion globally in the entire hedge fund universe. So the market today is larger than the entire hedge fund universe. But over the next 20 years, we're about to experience the largest transfer of wealth in history. There's $124 trillion that's moving downstream from the baby boomers to the next gen. And this is, again, the largest transfer of wealth ever. And I think it's going to fundamentally change how companies are financed, but it's going to also fundamentally change how a lot of these real world problems are solved. The reason I think family offices a lot of these real world problems I don't think are going to get solved by government, because government's usually not great at that stuff. I don't think it's going to get solved from corporate. I think it's going to happen from family offices. Again, it's not a panacea, but I do think family office will set, and here's the reason why. Every family, my family's been touched by prostate cancer. Your family's been touched by something. Every family's been touched by something. If you have these entrepreneurs who built these family offices and they're passionate about a cause, their kid has diabetes, it doesn't matter what it is, they've got the resources behind it. They've got patient capital where they don't have to, constantly turn the capital over, and they could run it more, not exactly, but more like a business. So it's my belief. You look at a couple examples, irrespective of what you think of Bill Gates. I would argue that he did more for the cure of COVID than the U.S. government. I gave you the example of Michael Milken. Eric Lefkowski was the founder of Groupon. His wife developed breast cancer. He didn't like the data, so he got into it and started. And as a result, it ended up starting a company called Tempest, which is now a publicly traded company. But he didn't do it initially to make money. He did it initially to help his wife. Sergey Brin has a predisposition for pancreatic cancer and has donated $1 billion. Is he going to solve it? I don't know, but I put my money on him over the American Cancer Society. So my belief is, and kind of my North Star is, I don't think it's a panacea, but I think that family offices, because they've got entrepreneurs who have causes and they've got the means to do it and they've got patient capital, the family offices are going to solve not all, but many of these real world problems we've got. And I think that to me is my North Star.
Yeah. And when you had also mentioned in other interviews of it's like the value that VCs, private equity provide is gas in the engine, essentially, of someone that wants to solve a problem of the business. And it's almost like you're saying, it is basically what you're saying. Family offices allow the most patient gasoline in the engine.
Well, look,
that way we can solve bigger problems.
Yeah, I mean, look at how the model works today. So, first of all, let me preface it by saying private equity has been an extremely profitable asset class. It has been, and I believe always will be. So, I'll preface it with that. But how the private equity model works today is a private equity firm buys a garage door company in Des Moines, Iowa. And when they buy it, I could tell you pretty close when they're going to sell it. And it's not that I'm so brilliant, it's just I know how they're compensated. They're going to sell it in about 5 years. And then they might sell it to a strategic, but oftentimes they're going to sell it to a second private equity firm. And I could tell you when they're going to sell it, which is going to be probably about 5 years because that's how they're compensated. So if you go over 20 years, if you look at what happens, this one garage door company is going to probably change hands 4 to 5 times. So let's call it 4 times. If you look at the taxes and the friction and the disruption in business versus a family office where IRR is a moot point, they have patient capital. They could buy it, the company, hold it for 20 years, which a private equity firm can't and won't, and let it compound. The results aren't even close. So I believe that the family office model is a superior model to the private equity model. The problem is we're really only in the first or second inning in the evolution of this. And my belief is that as private equity and venture capital disrupted the public markets in the mid to late 80s and became a multi-trillion-dollar industry, I believe family offices are starting to and will continue to disrupt private equity and venture capital because we have patient capital and because it is objectively a superior model. We just have to figure out ways to have people get the compensation model right. But we will get there, and it will happen, and it's happening in real time.
It's super. So so essentially the value that family offices bring that other models don't is time and patience. From
Correct.
What you're saying,
time, patience, and flexibility. They can be flexible with it, right? If they want to sell something quickly, they certainly can, but they don't have a shot clock. When a private equity firm buys a company, their fiduciaries are their LPs, and their LPs want to make as much money as possible as quickly as possible. So their incentive is to buy a company make as much money as possible, sell the company as quickly as possible, and that's usually about a 5-year turn. And the other problem that I see with a lot of the private equity and venture capital firms, and again, not all, but many, they're finance guys. Now, I'm a finance person, right? So I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but in order to create alpha, to truly create alpha, you need to operate. And the family offices, they're operators. They're not financial engineers. I could financial engineer any company and just strip it and give it a lot of debt and make money on it short term, which would be good for my investors, but bad for the company medium and long term. But long term, if you want the company to run successfully, you need to operate it. And if you look at the venture capital in the bench of the private equity firms, they're mostly, not all, but mostly financial guys. The operations is what is important, and that's what family offices do.
And I think guys like Vista Equity Partners, the ones that that's an interview that I've watched the other day, and he's talking about how the operational know-how and the frameworks and the mental models that they have, the proprietary info is their advantage. One thing that, an analogy that I'm making in my brain as I hear you talk about this is pre and post AI. So basically, the family offices, the value that they provide is patient capital, flexibility, and time. With AI, it just allows you to solve a bunch of different new problems that before you couldn't even think about solving. What other types of problems does time, patience, and flexibility allow you to solve? Is it philanthropic effort? What other types of problems does family office capital allow you to solve that previous models do not allow you to solve?
Well, again, because there is no shot clock, there is no, we need to get this done in 5 years. If a private equity firm is going to buy a company and they're going to probably hold it for 5 years, in 5 years, it might be a really great time to sell the company. It also might be a really bad time to sell the company, but they'll probably try to sell the company because that's how their LPs are compensated and that's how they're compensated. So the patient capital and the flexible capital, and it gives them the opportunity to do things on their own time frame. If you look at it from a conflict, there's far less conflicts of interest. They are looking at it long term on how to take a charity or how to make a company better over the long term, and they don't have the pressure of the LPs who are expecting to get value realization events every X number of years. They could let it compound. And if you look at what Warren Buffett or Charlie Munger has said about compounding, that's really where you can create true wealth. And it's not just the wealth. So I don't think it's just that family offices are going to change the way companies are financed, which they will and they are. I think they're going to fundamentally change the way charities are operated and run.
Very cool. What are the most exciting projects that you've been able to see come to life currently? Obviously, you have Michael Milken, you've heard whatever you feel about him, Bill Gates. Like, what are some other projects that because obviously you run that syndication of family offices that are all putting their capital work. What are some really exciting problems and projects and companies and philanthropic efforts that you've seen come to life through that syndication?
Right. Well, so two things. One, the syndication is basically, this is not nonprofit. This is where I take capital, I invest in every deal, I aggregate other people's money, and this is simply for profit to make money in different companies. And what we'll do, we don't charge anything, but I'm not doing it for self-list purpose. I do it self-ishly because I don't have enough capital to put $100 million per deal. I could put in a couple of million, $5 million per deal, but not $100 million. Now I could put $100 million. So I call what I do first call alpha. It's not really a business. It's just a way for me to deploy a finite amount of capital and aggregate other people's so that people will call us first if they've got a deal because they know we can close on $100 million and close it in 7 to 10 days. And we're also very quick to say no. So that part of the business is not from a philanthropic standpoint. What I'm saying is kind of my North Star. I'm not just looking at this for the rich to get richer. I mean, without a sustainable middle class, bad things happen in every society. And what's happening in our society is the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. Now, that's a very bad thing, and bad things happen when that happens. But the optimistic part of me is that I think that the next generation, um, they look at things through a different world. The impact investing, it didn't start from the older generation down, it started from the younger generation up. And as a result of that, I think that this next generation who's going to inherit $124 trillion and is going to have the capital to do it, are going to make real differences. When I was younger, if I bought a pair of jeans, if they fit and they looked decent, I would buy them. And if they didn't, I wouldn't buy them. My daughters, if they buy it, I've got beautiful daughters, 21 and 24, Zoe and Bella. If they buy a pair of jeans, it's got to fit and look good. But then they go on their phone and they can find out, how does this company treat their employees? Do they pollute? What's their record in child labor? All of these things. I had access to the Encyclopedia Britannica. They have access to the internet. So it's not that necessarily that this generation is better people. I think they are good people. I think our generation was good people too. But they've got access to the information. And because they have so much access to information, they can make the change. And that's why I'm so optimistic that even though the disparity of wealth and poverty is widening, and that's a bad thing, I do think the positive thing is that these real world problems, I don't think it's going to get solved by the government, and because government's usually not great at that stuff. I don't think it's going to get solved by the corporate sector. I think it's going to get solved by these family offices and the examples that I gave, who are touched by something, who have a cause, a personal cause, have the means to do it, and have the entrepreneurial ability to grow a company. This is now just figuring out a way to fix a cause, cure a cause.
Yeah, it's kind of like Elon with his operational mastermind is able to solve, not solve in solved space, but is able to make progress in getting to Mars and making much faster progress than a government department like
Well, what
NASA, for example.
right.
Or
What Bezos said is, he said, one of the reasons that you know his company's done so well is, if every company looks at things in a 3 to 5 year time frame, and you look at things in a 7 to 10 year time frame, longer, it's a huge competitive advantage. And family offices just take that to the next level. It's completely patient. It's not even 7 to 10 years. It's as long as you need it to be.
it's almost like the Japanese. Is it? I think it's Japan, or is it China? They operate in like 100-year plans
Japan.
versus Japan operate in 100-year plans versus the 3 to 5 year plans that you're talking about with. I'm also curious with. So you said you come from a finance background, so you're about generating alpha, and you're finding that the best way to do that is through the operational lens that entrepreneurs allow. What have been the most powerful lessons from the operators that you've been able to work with and see and study that have generated the most alpha?
Well, you look at guys. Take a guy like Greg Wasson. He was the CEO of Walgreens. Um, if you're going to invest in a healthcare company, he just happens to know more about healthcare than practically anybody in the world. If you look at Tim Callahan, who was Sam Zell's partner, um, he just has operated, happens to know more about real estate than most people. So I think that it's the people who are operating, who are really going to create the major differences. I think you're going to see a backlash. I think what happened in the family office world was post crash, pre-COVID, so 2008-9 to right before COVID. I don't care what you invested in, you made money. Private equity went up, interest rates were zero, real estate certainly went up, venture capital went up, Bitcoin went up, the stock market went up. So a lot of families basically said, you know what, I'm going to do this directly. And they didn't have the bench to do it, but they did it directly. And the model worked until it didn't, because everything went up. About 3 years ago, when they started jacking up interest rates, what happened was, now a lot of family offices who went direct, who were in way over their skis not only weren't making money, they were actually losing money. If they invested in a venture capital deal or a real estate deal and they're not real estate experts or venture capital experts, what do you do? And so I think there's going to be a backlash, and I think a lot of these single family offices are going to, the smaller ones I think will morph into multifamily offices, and the larger ones will get larger and larger and club deals together. And a guy like a Greg Wasson, if it's a healthcare deal, he'll lead it. A guy like a Tim Callahan, if it's a real estate deal, he'll lead it, and you'll follow through. But it's all following the operators. It's not just following where the money is.
So it's because they have such intimate experience in solving a problem in that adjacent industry, they can translate that over to a new problem in a similar industry, kind of like exactly what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, the problem now is, what happened, the model today. First of all, the family office model doesn't work. Only 25% of families make it to the second generation, and 10 make it to the third, and 5 make it to the fourth. So it's a flawed model, and there's a whole bunch of reasons why that is. What happens is somebody has a liquidity event. They sell their company for $1 billion. What do? 9 out of 10 times, the first thing they do is start investing. Their friends from the country club, it's in the paper. Everyone's hitting them up for money, and they invest with people that they trust and have done well. That's the last thing you should do. The first thing you should do is something called governance, which most people who have had a liquidity event don't even know what that means. You have to set up the governance. It's like the foundation of a house. You have to set up a mission statement. You have to have a succession plan. You have to figure out ways to grow this, do the soft skills. Once you've talked to an estate planning attorney, you get the structure, which is, again, like the foundation of a house. Once you've done all that, which could take a year, then you can start investing. But people do it backwards right now. People start investing first. I think what's going to happen is there is no playbook today. I think there will be a playbook coming, and we're working on it. I put together the Family Office Initiative at Stanford, and now it helped to do it at Booth. And we're trying to put that together so people know, okay, I have a liquidity event. First thing I do is governance. Second thing I do is put together a mission statement. Third thing I do is talk to somebody who can help us with next gen or succession. Then I talk to an estate planning attorney, get the structure, talk to somebody
Like Rockefeller.
right. And there isn't a playbook. There will be, but I believe we're at an inflection point, and I believe that my world, the family office world, is changing on a daily basis. And I think that, as I said earlier, as private equity and venture capital disrupted the public markets, family offices are starting to and will continue to disrupt the private equity and venture capital markets.
Well, so what's interesting is you both said, and I know what you mean. I just want people to listen, people that are listening. You painted, on one hand, it is the best model, and on the other hand, the current state of the model is flawed.
Right.
So it's almost you're talking about family offices right now aren't the model that you're talking about in the future. And the thing that bridges that gap between what the flawed family office model that exists right now and the family office model that will cure diseases that we can't even imagine of curing right now. The difference between those two is governance. Is that
No.
what is the
So
or the order in which they implement that?
So what I think is happening is the reason that I needed to bring this to university. I mean, what's the agenda of a university? Research and education. That's what their goals are, right? Right now, all these conferences are for profit. Which again, I don't begrudge anybody, but it's a pay-to-play, sponsor-driven model. I think how this is going to play out is like when we put together the course, we had a course at Booth where we had 65 MBA students. We didn't know how it would do. We thought it would do well. It was the first pure family office course in the world that was taught specifically for MBA students at Booth. We had 65 kids. It sold out. It was the quickest course to sell out. We did a half a credit course, and Professor Heaton was the main teacher. I taught one of the courses. And what was interesting is the class that I taught, I just gave my email out to people if they had any questions. 49 out of 65 people reached out to me just asking questions. There's huge interest in this. So I think what's going to happen is the universities are going to now come in and play a significant role. Once I announced what we're doing at Booth, Harvard reached out to me, MIT reached out to me, Vanderbilt reached out to me, Kellogg, Vanderbilt, all of Notre Dame, more and more schools. So I think while Stanford was the first, and Booth is the first full-fledged program, it's not going to last. And I think that they're going to talk about ways the companies are financed, but they're also going to talk about philanthropy. Because again, there are real world problems that we have. And if the family offices have the capital, have the patience, have the entrepreneur behind it who know how to run something entrepreneurial, that to me is what's going to be a game changer. And that's really my North Star.
What's so interesting about you're taking it to where it needs to be in order to go downstream for the younger generation for the future. So what's interesting to me is like myself, my partners, a mentor of mine who is in private equity, for example, he didn't graduate high school. My partners didn't necessarily graduate college. And a lot of our education now is purely coming from now what we find with AI and then making sure that those sources are actually credible. But a lot of it is through direct social media videos like this, which is why I love having conversations like this, because this is stuff. Literally the only difference between people who have been able to get on the other side of those prestigious universities is because they even realized that it was even possible. Like these topics aren't even seeds of thoughts at all for some, like coming from my family background, like this concept isn't even considered of as possible, or at least we're not, just through sheer exposure. So something that I'm very passionate about is in putting this education out on social, because this education being out on social, now anyone can be exposed to it with a YouTube account, which is something that is a miracle and is amazing to me. So if someone were to go attend that class and have almost a curriculum, obviously you probably just can't give away everything in there, but if someone were to attend that class and you have a curriculum on the things that you teach in that, what would that curriculum be? And what could you share with, if someone were to stumble across this who had never even been exposed to the idea? They've already been exposed to what a family office is capable of and what is even possible. B, what would they be exposed to through that course specifically?
Right. Well, the first course we took, we didn't know how the first course would do, so we did a half a credit course. Now, it far exceeded our expectations, and the students loved it. And like I said, it sold out right away. We had 65 students. And next semester, we're going to have a full credit course. So we're making progress, and it's doing well. And we got most of the stuff right. There's some things we needed to tweak, and we'll still need to tweak it next semester. But I think in general, we're trying to educate the next gen, because today the top kids out of Booth or Stanford or Wharton or Kellogg, most of them are the business schools. They want to get into private equity, real estate, venture capital, hedge funds. Nobody really wants to go into a family office. They don't even know what a family office is. But my belief is that with 10 trillion in capital today and 124 trillion transferring from the baby boomers to the next gen in the next 20 years, which is the largest transfer of wealth in history, I think that in 3, 5, 7 years, working for a family office will be the first choice of these students. Now, there's a lot that we have to get right, and I talked earlier about objectively the family office model is a superior model to the private equity and venture capital model because they don't have a time frame. Having said that, very few family offices can execute. What we have to change is we have to figure out, well, why can't they execute? Well, one of the problems has to do with compensation. So a family office, and again, I'm generalizing, but if a family office pays a kid $500,000 out of Stanford to work for them. Not all, but many of them look at that. That cost me $500,000. That's the cost. It's a cost. I can 100% assure you that if Blackstone or Carlyle or KKR pays a kid $500,000 out of Stanford, they do not look at him as or her as a cost. They look at that as a potential $20 million profit center. So it's nuanced, but until you look at things more as a profit center. So one of the things family offices have to get right, which they're just starting to, and that's something we'll work on in our program, is how do you get the compensation? If you're going to compete with Carlyle and KKR, you have to have the talent. In order to get the talent, you got to pay them. In order to pay them, you have to have the compensation model right, where you give them part of the carry. You give them lines of credit. You give them forgivable loans. You give them ways where they can invest with it, similar to what KKR and Carlyle does. That's just one example of what we need to do as an industry. And I think the other there's many issues, but right now, family offices, again, in general, are very private, and they're entitled to be. They don't have to. I can go to PitchBook and I can look at the top 100 venture capital firms from 1 to 100. I can look at the top private equity firms from 1 to 100. I can't do that for family offices because they don't have to report if they don't want to. And they're But having said that, if they want to compete with the private equity and venture capital firms, if they do, it's incumbent upon us, the family offices, to put together a statement basically saying, here's kind of what we look for. They have to lift the curtain and come out there, because right now the problem is, how do the smart guys find the rich guys, and how do the rich guys find the smart guys? And right now it's very hard to do it, because even though I will tell your audience it's a better model. The problem is, okay, I want to work with, but I know one family office, and I don't know how do I get in touch. And then I've got a new technology in the food industry, and I don't know which family offices invest. So how I think it's going to play out, and I think what we're doing, there's a family that we work very closely with, and they put together just a one page piece of paper, and all it did is says, we invest in these following asset classes. Our average check size is X. We do need a board seat, or we don't need a board seat. We need majority, we don't need majority. They tell you exactly what they want. Now, entrepreneur is going to see that and say, okay, well, it looks like they do invest in early stage venture. It looks like they like technology. Their average size check is X. It fits. And then it's going to be a much more seamless thing. So right now, we need to put together the ecosystem of the rich people and the smart people. And that's what we're trying to do. And I think that's going to happen slowly, but as quickly as we can at Booth, and then at more and more schools.
Man, that's so cool. The can move really fast with social, but just something that you said. So what's funny is when you say they put together a document that tells you exactly what their requirements are, their interests, what they want. I find that in the finance world and private equity world and everything, the word marketing is a bit of a sleazy and like a looked down upon term a little bit, but that's basically what is missing. Because that marketing, it allows you to get the talent, the talent, find the talented kids that you want to bring on and work for your family office. Obviously, knowing how to compensate them and make the opportunity sizable enough for them to actually want to join and work for the family office. But it's like the branding and marketing of the family office sounds like it's the problem.
Well, that's part of the problem. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to professionalize and institutionalize these family offices. Okay, so Ty Warner was a brilliant businessman. He sold Beanie Babies. He cornered the market. It was collectibles, made billions of dollars. Then he went to try to buy the Four Seasons Hotel, and he got clobbered. So you've got huge amounts of money in very inefficient hands. And again, I used to think we're in the third inning, then I think that we're in the second inning. Sometimes I think we're in the first inning in the evolution of the family offices, because there's so much that needs to happen. But I could tell you objectively, it is objectively a superior model to the private equity and venture capital model. But because so few family offices can execute right now, so what if it's a better model? If you can't find them, it's a moot point. I think by doing this at university, and again, Booth is the first, or Stanford's the first, Booth is the second, but more and more will come on board. We're going to start to professionalize and institutionalize this industry, and not only things like compensation, but governance and succession and next gen and all of these, what I'll call soft skills, are going to come to the forefront. And there will be more and more playbooks. So the fact that only 25% of families make it to the second gen, 10 to the third, 5 to the fourth, that's one of the things we're trying to solve for and change that.
Running it like an actual, running the good parts of corporations and businesses and implementing that into the family. The privatist, the most private that it could get, which is a family office, is implementing that. It's funny because it's like their biggest strength so far has been, this has been a personal observation and talking to guys who work in family offices, etc. It's like their biggest advantage is also their biggest weakness, because they're insulated from all the garbage and whatnot that's out there, because they are private. They kind of keep their distance, like you're saying. They're also not exposed to all the, I don't know, the advantages that things that are found in a small startup, for example, in San Francisco, the way that they're operating, the way that they're moving, the way that like a 10 employee team can make $1 billion company. It's like, why? But they're not exposed to those things because, kind of like what you said, they're extremely private. They're extremely isolated and insulated from the rest of the world. That's been an interesting observation of mine. Something.
And they're very siloed. I mean, right now,
Yeah.
where do they meet? They go to these family office conferences, which are just pay to play, sponsor driven models, which is not a great way to do it. So a lot of the family offices, there's not a cohesive network of them. So one of the best things that I could do, when I meet a family office, the biggest value add I can give to them is, it's not giving seeing if they want to come in on an investment. It's just introducing to 10 or 20 other families, because they don't necessarily know. They might know it in their own market, but they don't know it throughout the country or even throughout the world. So we need to come together as an industry and make this family office market less siloed. And when I introduce one family to, or that just started, to 20 different families, there's no better value add that I can give anywhere than just introduce them, because they're in the same spot.
Yeah, what's interesting about what you're saying is it's like the opportunity to do that is available with social media. So I could only imagine if all these family offices went out and communicated who they are, what they believe in, their value system, etc., via social. And you have these multi-billion-dollar, almost, I don't know, trillion-dollar platforms like Meta, YouTube, etc., that are so good at finding the people that will be interested in your topics. Even if it gets 300 views, it gets 300s of the right views. Even if it gets 100 views, you know that the 100 views are extremely targeted because they've spent billions of dollars in making sure that their content, like your content recommendations on social, are relevant to you. So I'd be very interested to see. There's a very popular entrepreneur influencer now, but they essentially run like a family office type of model on the back end, which is Alex and Layla Hormozi of acquisition.com. They're making content and attracting all the people that are very like-minded to how they run their business, the culture that they have inside, they communicate their values and everything like that. And it's totally opposite compared to what you say of family offices are extremely private. I know for a fact, if I go on LinkedIn and I find someone that works at a family office, it says family office, doesn't have any other information, and the logo or like the profile picture of the family office company that they work at isn't even a profile picture, or most companies have logos or something like that. There's no logo. It's just the standard LinkedIn placeholder that just has.
Well, what's interesting, so I did a podcast with David Rubenstein, and David said, and I believe he's correct, that in 5-10 years, he's the founder of Carlyle. and everyone knows, most people know Carlisle. His family office is called Declaration Partners. Unless you're in the family office world, know the name Declaration Partners. He's saying that in 5 to 10 years, these will become brand names. The Declaration Partners of the world, the family offices. They're not now, but they will. And I think I agree with him. So again, we're at an inflection point, and the fascinating thing about my world is it literally is changing in real time, and I see it happening um, in fits and starts. But from a macro standpoint, I think you need to do it from a university standpoint. You need to get the universities involved in some capacity, and it can't be a for-profit thing where families need to learn. Because just because you made money creating DocuSign, which is a brilliant app, doesn't mean you're good investing in real estate, right? So we need to bring everybody together.
That one sounded a little targeted. But
No, no, no.
I'm
I'm not.
joking. I'm joking. But yeah, that interesting. So I have compensation, operations, talent, privacy, or at least clarity of values and what they're after. What else is almost holding a family office back from being that perfect model?
Well, first of all, I don't know if there's ever going to be a perfect model. And secondly, family offices don't have to
Better,
do this.
yeah.
If they don't, some family offices just they don't want to compete with Carlisle or KKR, and they want to and will continue to remain private, and that's totally fine. All I'm saying is, if they want to compete, then they have to change the way they do things, and that's basically putting it together. I mean,
That makes sense.
very few family offices have a website. I mean, it's like you say a website, people are like, why would a family office possibly have a website? Well, I believe that the family offices in the future who are going to compete with with the KKRs and Carlisles of the world and the Apollos are going to have not necessarily a fancy website, but they're going to have that one page that the family office that we work closely with has that says, this is what we do, this is what we don't do, this is what we need, this is what we don't need. And then it's going to be much more efficient rather than because a family office is worth $10 billion, you figured they can invest in your early stage venture. Well, what if they wrote down, we don't invest in early stage venture? It's a wasted phone call, right? So we need to get that together. We
Yeah, and
need
you
to figure
can
out ways
preserve a relationship that you have with them instead of pitching them, wasting their time with something they would never even consider.
and they see that they'll see the other, and what this other family does is that they put down the investments that they've made. We've invested in this company, these 12 companies, portfolio companies. And then if you're the entrepreneur and you come to them and you see that they invest in, let's just say, early stage venture, and you see other early stage venture companies that they've gotten, and you see the average size check they write, and you see they do need, they want one board seat or whatever, it's just so much more seamless to be able to go to that one place. It doesn't exist now. So this is not going to happen overnight, but it's 100% going to happen. Now, I could be wrong on the time. It could take maybe it takes 5 years rather than 3, or 7 years rather than 5, but directionally, I'm correct.
Yeah. What's so interesting is that it's almost there'll be an event that'll happen, maybe in the startup world or something like AI, for example, or agent. And so that's just something I'm obsessed with right now. Don't pay it any mind, but something like an innovation, put it that way, will happen. And it's so interesting to hear the delay in implementation across, for example, VC is the first to adopt social media and content at scale. And at this point, companies like Y Combinator are almost media companies. They're not even, they're posting on YouTube weekly consistently, and they're bringing the deal flow, and they're able to source startup talent and everything. Like, it's unbelievable. Their advantage because of their social reach now is insane. It's almost, if I ever want to do a startup, my dream is to be part of a Y Combinator now. It's their advantage. And now it's starting to kind of be picked up in the private equity world. And it's so interesting to hear how behind the family office world is in the with the same innovations that are eventually going to come. So it's almost like you're looking over here and you're telling them, okay, this is what's going to come. This is what's on the way. This is what's on the way. And you sound maybe crazy to them, but you already see it happening in other industries. That's just something that's been very interesting to me to see. And you're basically saying the same pattern, because the idea that a website is a bit of a stretch, I must sound absolutely bonkers and insane when I say a YouTube channel would be a really good asset to have. So that's just something I want to highlight with what you're saying. You answered a question indirectly, which one of mine was going to be why you think that 80% of family offices shouldn't exist in their current form, but you pretty much answered that. Especially if they want to compete with the larger private equity firms, like you're saying. Man, I see why you're fired up about this.
It's a fascinating time to be. Look at this as 1987 when my dad, when I graduated from Northwestern, he was writing a book on leveraged buyouts. I didn't know what a leveraged buyout was. I got an offer at Drexel Burnham, and Drexel at the time was the most profitable firm on Wall Street. My dad, who was a brilliant man, who I loved and was kind of my hero, um, he said, there's a couple of people that he was a banker. He worked at First National Bank of Chicago. There's a couple of people at a bank I want you to meet. Now, when you're 22 years old, you're smarter than your dad and you don't really listen to everything he says. And I'm like, Dad, I'm good. I don't need to meet your friends, and I'll just take my job at Drexel, which is the most And
Yeah.
then 2 years later, Drexel goes bankrupt. The people that I wouldn't meet with my dad, and when he was talking about leveraged buyouts, that was a precursor to private equity. And John Canning and Stan Golder, who started GTCR and Madison Dearborn, are the two people that I refused to meet. I didn't even know what that industry was. So I think that we're at a point now where, with family offices, we are at an inflection point right now. And every accounting firm, every law firm, every service provider, every NetJets, all of these companies, they all want to get into the family office market because that's where the money is. The problem is that the first, second, and third thing a family office wants to know when they work with you is, can they trust you? And the fourth thing is, what's your background, what's your track record, etc. Now, institutionally, that's flipped. So if institution's going to look, they're going to want to know what's your 1, 3, 5-year track record, what's your biggest drawdown, and then they'll diligence you as a person. The whole family office thing, it's a relationship business. I don't believe that all these family offices necessarily want to or love managing money. I think that some of them do, but I think a lot of this had to do with they stopped trusting Wall Street, which was justifiable. I mean, the wirehouses aren't even fiduciaries. Now think about that. You legally don't have to do what's in the best interest of the client. You're not a fiduciary. So what happened was the wirehouses were there, and then RIAs, which are registered investment advisors, who are fiduciaries, which is a better model, came out and they exploded. And it made much more sense. And then on top of the RIAs are the MFOs, which are the multifamily offices, which is simply just a RIA, but rather than looking at things just to create alpha, they look at things holistically, like estate planning and next gen and governance and things like that. So a whole industry is starting right now. It has started. I mean, the industry started. I mean, you go back. Akbar the Great probably was 400s. 400 AD was probably the first, and then you can go to the Medici's, and in the U.S. it was Rockefeller and Vanderbilt in the late 1800s. But 68% of the family offices that exist today started since 2000, and half of them started since 2009. So this is a very, very new industry, and it's going to change, but it can't not change. I just could be wrong on the time frame.
Well, you're reminding me of a headline that I saw that was trending of these investment banking and corporate banking, these corporate banking corporations, put it that way, are requiring graduates in young talent that are coming out of college or university that are wanting to work with them, if they've handshook on a deal with the private equity firm, you're basically saying that this is what's going to happen next. Whether you're, it's not an if, it's more of a when that you're unsure of. That could be the case of private equity to family offices or family office, because it's almost like the wild. It's the same opportunity, like you said, in the '80s, has just moved to family offices. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, I think that in the 80s when private equity look, I ran a hedge fund, right? So if I'm running a hedge fund and you've got a company and you've got to report to me or somebody on Wall Street every 90 days, it's hard to really run a company because you're basically managing earnings. So the model, the private equity model, was a better model. 22% covers the overhead, 20% I make money if you make money. It was a better model. You don't have to report earnings every 90 days. The problem is that many, not all, but many of them, it became an AUM game. And they realized that on the 2%, if you could raise $5 billion, 2% a year every year as an annuity is a huge dollar amount. So I had a good friend who did a roll up of logistics companies in New York, phenomenal track record, crushed it. He needed $150 million. It was a niche strategy. The placement agent, based on his track record, which was phenomenal, called him with great news, said he was able to get him $500 million. My friend said, okay, that's great. I just need 150 because that's all I need for it's a niche strategy. The placement agent came to his apartment in New York and wrote down 2% of 500 million equals X, 2% of 150 million equals Y. What am I missing? And my friend, who was a bit incredulous, said, here's what you're missing. If I do what you want me to do, there won't be a fund two because I can't deploy the extra 350 million. It's a niche strategy. That's a microcosm of what's wrong with the industry. These funds have become too big.
That's so interesting. Man, the more I learn about family offices, the more fascinated I am by them.
It is again it will family offices will fundamentally change how companies are financed going forward. They will fundamentally change how real world problems are solved. It's going to be massive. It's just going to take time, and we just have to put together an industry. We have to professionalize it. We have to institutionalize it, and make it where it offer courses, and we need to train the next group of people of MBA students who are going to come into it. So yeah, it's changing in real time, but it's fascinating to see because I see it literally changing on a day-to-day basis.
Mm. What is the number one question that if I am a family office, I should be asking someone like you?
That's a that's a loaded question. Well, first of all, let's talk because there is no playbook, right? Let's say you sell your company for $50 million. That's a lot of money.
Yeah.
It's not even close to have enough money to have a family office. How much money do you need to have a family office? There's no playbook that says you need this, and if you have less than this, you should go to multifamily office. If you're going to invest in the private markets and invest in direct deals and try to compete with the Carlyles and KKRs and Apollos of the world, you need a bare bones minimum of $500 million. Okay? And if you do the math, if you reverse engineer it, you can see why that's the case. There are a ton of family offices that are under $500 million that are single family offices. They don't have enough capital to do it. And so there's a learning curve, right? Multifamily offices were really created for families between 10 million to maybe 250 million. Now, if you're going to only invest in the private market and the public markets and not invest in the private markets and not have a separate deal team, probably 250 million, at least in my opinion, is the number you need in order to have a family office to make economic sense. You can invest in the private markets, probably $500 million. I've got friends who would say it's probably double that, and they're not necessarily wrong. But 250 million if you're going to invest in the public markets, 500 million if you're going to invest in the private markets. So that's one of the things. They have a liquidity event. So do I have enough money to start a family office? And they need to learn from other people. And because family offices have historically been so private and behind the veil, once they lift the veil, people could learn from mistakes that they've made. And the reason only 25% make it to the second gen, or 10 to the third, or 5 to the fourth, that's going to change when we educate and when we make this industry. Again, 124 trillion is transferring from the baby boomers. That's not that's factual. In the next 20 years, this will fundamentally change finance, how companies are financed, and the way real world problems are solved from a philanthropic standpoint. So that's why it's such an interesting time to be in it. And that's why when I put out what I'm doing at Booth, Harvard, 5 or 6 of the top schools in the world reached out, and they're going to, again, Booth is not going to have a monopoly on this. We're the first one to do it. But in 5 to 10 years, I think every major business school is going to have a program like this.
Wow, that's fascinating. So you're the masterminding is now possible because of you're almost de-siloing some family offices. So you're open sourcing the family model. Last question is, if I am a family office, if I have had that major liquidity event, and I am sitting on $500 million, $250 million, why want to compete with someone like a KKR or Apollo? Why? Because if there's one thing I've learned is that running a business is not easy, so to speak. So if I'm going to operate my family office like a business, it's like I'm introducing voluntary, not friction, but just conflict, like growth pains. And if I'm sitting on that much money and that much wealth, but I worked my whole life to get to the point where I can sit on this much wealth, what is then the incentive at that point to go and compete with an industry full of guys who are wanting to have the liquidity to get to the point to where you want to get to? Does that question make sense
Sure.
at all?
No, it's a very good question, very thoughtful. I think that first of all, not every family offices should or even want to or have an interest in competing with the KKRs, right? Some family offices are looking for wealth preservation. They're worth X number of dollars. That's more money than their great grandkids are going to need. All they're looking to do is preserve capital. There's some family offices that are worth $5 billion and they want to grow it to $20 billion. Neither is wrong. It's just some people are more conservative, some people are more aggressive, some people want to grow, some people want to preserve. So it really depends on what you want to do. The reason I think that people are going to be competing with the Carlyles and the Blackstones and the KKRs, it's become an AUM game. And to create true alpha, it's not investing in a $25 billion KKR fund, which will probably do okay. It's going to invest in the $250 million to $1 billion. That's where the alpha is created, into the smaller firms, right? And the family offices are starting to see that the AUM model of these private equity firms have become an inherent conflict of interest. As a result of that, they stop trusting Wall Street. As a result of that, they want to do what's in their best interest. So there's a better alignment of interest. I had some families that, again, because you make $2 billion doesn't necessarily mean you're sophisticated. It means you were a great businessman in a specific vertical. But because you're good at real estate doesn't mean you know how to invest in venture. Or because you know technology doesn't mean you can invest in real estate. And it's a mismatch. So I think what's going to happen is you're going to have more and more of these club deals. Like I said, the smaller family offices that shouldn't exist, which are many of them, are going to morph into the multifamily offices. And the large family offices that should exist, which can compete and are objectively a better model, will get bigger and bigger in the club deals together. So I just think we're at a fascinating time, and I wake up every day, just like, okay, how's this going to change today? So it's a wonderful time to be in the industry.
That's so cool. Well, Ron, this has been a fascinating conversation. Man, it's more of a conversation of, if you want the returns that you were thinking of in the future. This is what's required, and this is how you compete. And this is, and I mean, you ran a hedge fund, so that's about as good at allocating capital as you can get. So, this is so interesting. I just want to say thank you for the conversation. I definitely learned a lot. And if I didn't know what a family office was or what was possible, I learned a lot. And I know if someone was listening that is running a family office, they definitely learned a lot. And I would imagine that they would want to reach out to you. So what is a way that they could get in touch with you, learn more about what you're building?
We put together, we put together a media company. So familyofficeworldmedia.com is probably the easiest way to educate an entire industry and to learn about it, whether you're at the beginning or even more sophisticated. Familyofficeworldmedia.com is the site. And then I post a lot on LinkedIn. I like to put out content because I think we need to put more content out without agendas.
Well, we would love to help you facilitate that by having you back soon.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. This was fun.